In 2019, the world's manufacturing supply chains resembled an intricate spider web, complex, interconnected, and spanning the entire globe. Products we use every day contained components from dozens of countries, assembled in yet another, before reaching our homes. But in just a few short years, this web has been dramatically rewoven. Welcome to the age of supply chain nationalism. Hello Trend Pulse viewers. Today we're diving into one of the most significant economic shifts of our time, a transformation that affects everything from the car you drive to the phone in your pocket. On April 1st, 2025, the United States implemented its most sweeping tariff policy in decades. 25% on imported vehicles, 20% on electronics from China, and new duties on pharmaceuticals and critical minerals. Within 48 hours, the European Union, China, and Mexico announced retaliatory measures. And just like that, the rules of global manufacturing were rewritten overnight. But these tariffs aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet or political talking points. They represent a fundamental shift in how countries view their economic security and manufacturing capabilities. What we're witnessing is nothing less than supply chain nationalism, a movement that's reshaping where products are made, how much they cost, and which companies and countries will thrive in this new reality. In the next 15 minutes, we'll explore how we got here, which industries are being transformed, and what strategies companies are using to adapt. We'll examine the winners and losers in this new manufacturing landscape and what it all means for consumers like you. Whether you're watching this from Los Angeles, Caracas, or anywhere in between, the reshaping of global supply chains will impact your life in ways both obvious and subtle. So let's break down how tariffs are fundamentally changing where and how the products of tomorrow will be made. To understand today's supply chain nationalism, we need to look back at how global manufacturing became so interconnected in the first place. The story begins in the 1980s and 90s, when a perfect storm of factors created what economists call hyperglobalization. Companies discovered they could dramatically cut costs by moving production to countries with lower labor costs, primarily in Asia. What started as simple outsourcing of basic manufacturing soon evolved into complex global supply chains. This wage differential was just the beginning. Three key developments accelerated the trend. First, technology made global coordination possible. The internet, specialized software, and telecommunications advances meant companies could manage operations across multiple countries in real time. Second, trade agreements systematically dismantled barriers. The creation of the World Trade Organization in 1995, China's entry in 2001, and dozens of bilateral agreements reduced tariffs to historic lows, making it economically viable to ship components across multiple borders. Third, the philosophy of just-in-time manufacturing took hold. Companies minimized inventory costs by having components arrive exactly when needed, creating lean, efficient operations, but also introducing vulnerabilities few recognized at the time. By 2019, the average automobile contained parts from dozens of countries. Your smartphone likely had components from over 40 different nations. T-shirts might be made from cotton grown in one country, spun into yarn in another, woven into fabric in a third, before being cut and sewn in yet another. This system delivered unprecedented efficiency and low consumer prices, but it also created dependencies that would soon be tested in ways few anticipated. In early 2020, the fragility of global supply chains was suddenly exposed for all to see. As COVID-19 spread worldwide, countries scrambled for basic medical supplies, only to discover they had become dependent on imports for essentials like masks and ventilators. The pandemic revealed a fundamental truth. In times of crisis, global supply chains can quickly break down as nations prioritize their own citizens' needs. The semiconductor shortage that followed demonstrated how disruption in one sector could cascade across industries. Automakers worldwide were forced to park partially built vehicles while waiting for chips, costing the industry an estimated $210 billion in 2021 alone. But COVID-19 was just one catalyst. Geopolitical tensions, particularly between the United States and China, had been building for years. What began as concerns over trade deficits evolved into deeper questions about technological competition, national security, and economic independence. Governments began identifying critical industries essential for national security: semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, advanced batteries, rare earth minerals, and more. The question shifted from what's most efficient to what's most secure. This brings us to the current wave of tariffs. Beginning in 2018, but accelerating dramatically in 2024 and 2025, major economies have implemented increasingly aggressive trade barriers. 25% tariffs on imported vehicles and parts, 20% duties on electronics from specific countries, 10 to 25% tariffs on pharmaceuticals and medical devices, and targeted restrictions on critical minerals and technologies. These aren't isolated policies. They represent a fundamental shift in economic philosophy, from globalization to what many are calling supply chain nationalism. The belief that countries should secure their manufacturing capabilities within their borders or among trusted allies. The implications of this shift are profound and far-reaching. Let's look at how specific industries are being transformed, starting with one of the most globally integrated sectors, automotive manufacturing. Few industries exemplify global supply chains better than automotive manufacturing. The average vehicle crosses international borders multiple times during production, with components from dozens of countries. Take a vehicle assembled in the United States. Before recent tariffs, it likely contained an engine from Mexico, transmission from Japan, electronics from China, steel from South Korea, and rubber from Thailand, all coordinated in a complex choreography of just-in-time delivery. The implementation of 25% tariffs on imported vehicles and parts has sent shockwaves through this finely tuned system. The immediate effects have been dramatic. Vehicle prices have increased by an average of 8.5% in affected markets. Sales volumes have declined by approximately 12% in the first quarter following implementation, but the long-term impacts are even more significant. Major automakers are rapidly reshaping their production networks. Caterpillar has reshored construction equipment production from Japan to Georgia and Texas. Toyota announced a $1.3 billion expansion of its Kentucky facility to reduce reliance on imported components. Volkswagen is shifting some production from Germany to its Tennessee plant for US-bound vehicles. Mexican auto parts suppliers are seeing a surge in investment as nearshoring becomes the preferred strategy. What we're seeing isn't just temporary adjustment. It's a fundamental restructuring of automotive supply chains. Companies are accepting higher costs in exchange for greater security and predictability. The winners in this transformation include domestic parts suppliers, automation technology providers, and logistics companies specializing in regional distribution. The losers include traditional import-dependent dealers, consumers facing higher prices, and manufacturers unable to quickly adapt their supply networks. If automotive manufacturing is complex, semiconductor production is exponentially more so. A single advanced chip may cross international borders more than 70 times during production, with specialized processes occurring in different countries. This industry sits at the intersection of economic competitiveness and national security, making it a primary target for supply chain nationalism. The pandemic-induced chip shortage that paralyzed industries from automotive to consumer electronics served as a wake-up call. Nations suddenly realized that dependency on a handful of manufacturers, primarily in Taiwan, South Korea, and China, represented a strategic vulnerability. The response has been unprecedented government intervention. The US CHIPS Act allocated $52 billion to domestic semiconductor manufacturing. The EU CHIPS Act committed €43 billion. Japan, South Korea, and China have announced similar initiatives. The results are already visible. TSMC's $40 billion investment in Arizona facilities, Intel's $20 billion expansion in Ohio, Samsung's $17 billion facility in Texas, and a European Silicon Valley developing in Dresden, Germany. But reshoring this ultra-sophisticated industry comes at a steep price. Producing semiconductors in the US costs approximately 30% more than in Asia. These costs will ultimately be passed to consumers across virtually every product category that uses chips, from smartphones to refrigerators. The 20% tariff on Chinese electronics has already driven price increases across consumer technology. Manufacturers are responding by relocating final assembly to countries not subject to tariffs, redesigning products to use components from approved sources, and accepting reduced margins to maintain market share. The semiconductor industry demonstrates a crucial point about supply chain nationalism. Security comes at a price. The question facing policymakers and business leaders is whether that price is worth paying. Perhaps no industry better illustrates the tension between efficiency and security than pharmaceuticals. For decades, drug manufacturing has steadily moved offshore in search of cost savings. By 2020, approximately 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients used in US medications came from overseas, primarily China and India. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the risks of this dependency when countries began restricting exports of critical medications and ingredients. Recent tariffs of 10 to 25% on pharmaceutical imports represent just one aspect of a broader push to reshore this critical industry. Governments are also implementing tax incentives for domestic manufacturing, streamlined regulatory pathways for reshored facilities, requirements for strategic stockpiles of essential medications, and subsidies for advanced manufacturing technologies. The industry is responding with significant investments in domestic capacity. Pfizer's $470 million expansion in Michigan for API production, Eli Lilly's $2.1 billion manufacturing facilities in Indiana and North Carolina, Regeneron's $1.8 billion expansion in New York, and AstraZeneca's €1.2 billion investment in Ireland. However, reshoring pharmaceuticals presents unique challenges. Domestic production increases costs by 30 to 40% compared to offshore manufacturing. Environmental regulations are typically stricter. Skilled labor commands higher wages. The result is an unavoidable trade-off: greater supply security versus higher costs for healthcare systems and patients. Industry analysts project price increases of 8 to 12% for affected medications as reshoring accelerates. These three industries, automotive, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals, illustrate the complex trade-offs involved in supply chain nationalism. But companies aren't limited to simple reshoring. Many are pursuing more nuanced strategies to balance security with efficiency. While reshoring gets the most attention, companies are actually pursuing several distinct strategies to adapt to the new era of supply chain nationalism. Nearshoring involves relocating production from distant countries to those closer to your primary markets. This approach balances some of the security benefits of reshoring with better economics. For US companies, Mexico has emerged as the primary nearshoring destination. In 2024 alone, Mexico received over $35 billion in manufacturing investment, with average wages around $6 per hour compared to 25 plus in the United States. Nearshoring offers several advantages: reduced shipping times and costs, similar time zones for better coordination, tariff advantages through trade agreements like USMCA, and cultural and geographic proximity. But it also comes with challenges: infrastructure limitations, security concerns in some regions, capacity constraints as demand surges, and continued vulnerability to some geopolitical risks. Companies like GE Appliances have shifted production from China to Mexico, cutting shipping times from 35 days to just 5 days while avoiding tariffs. European manufacturers are similarly moving operations from Asia to Eastern Europe and North Africa. Friendshoring represents a newer strategy, relocating supply chains to countries with shared values and strong diplomatic ties. This approach prioritizes geopolitical alignment over pure economics. The concept gained prominence in 2022 when US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen advocated for supply chains that are secure, transparent, and sustainable, code for working with political allies rather than adversaries. We're now seeing distinct supply chain blocs emerge, a US-led network including Canada, Mexico, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, a European Union network with strong ties to North Africa, and a China-centered network extending through the Belt and Road Initiative. Apple's gradual shift of production from China to India and Vietnam exemplifies this approach. Similarly, European pharmaceutical companies are prioritizing production in EU member states rather than lowest-cost global locations. Rather than putting all their eggs in one basket, many companies are pursuing diversification. maintaining production in traditional hubs while adding capacity in alternative locations. The China Plus One strategy has become particularly common. Companies maintain their Chinese manufacturing presence, but add capacity in countries like Vietnam, Thailand, or Malaysia as a hedge against tariffs and geopolitical risks. Nike now produces footwear in 14 different countries, with no single nation representing more than 30% of its manufacturing capacity. Samsung has spread smartphone production across Vietnam, India, and South Korea while reducing its Chinese operations. These alternative strategies, nearshoring, friendshoring, and diversification, demonstrate that supply chain nationalism isn't simply about bringing everything home. It's about creating more resilient, secure networks that can withstand disruption while maintaining reasonable costs. But how are other nations responding to these shifts? Let's examine the global reaction to supply chain nationalism. Supply chain nationalism isn't occurring in a vacuum. Countries targeted by tariffs and reshoring initiatives are responding with their own measures to protect their economic interests. The most immediate response has been retaliatory tariffs. When the US implemented its recent automotive tariffs, the European Union responded within days with duties on American agricultural products, digital services, and aerospace components. This pattern of escalation creates the risk of full-blown trade wars, where everyone loses. The 2018 to 2019 US-China trade conflict reduced global GDP by an estimated 0.8%, a figure that could be dwarfed by more widespread trade barriers. Beyond retaliation, countries are fighting to maintain their manufacturing base through aggressive incentives. China offering tax exemptions and subsidized land to keep foreign manufacturers, Vietnam streamlining, permitting and offering 20-year tax holidays, Mexico developing specialized industrial parks with guaranteed power and security, and India's production-linked incentive scheme offering $26 billion across 14 sectors. We're also seeing the acceleration of regional trade agreements that create manufacturing zones insulated from broader global tensions. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership in Asia, the African Continental Free Trade Area, expanded cooperation within the European Union, and strengthening of the USMCA framework in North America. These agreements are fostering specialized regional manufacturing hubs, automotive clusters in central Mexico, electronics manufacturing in Vietnam and Malaysia, pharmaceutical production in Ireland and Switzerland, and advanced materials processing in Eastern Europe. The global response to supply chain nationalism is creating a more regionalized, less integrated world economy. But technology is simultaneously enabling new manufacturing models that could reshape these trends. While supply chain nationalism is disrupting established patterns, technological advances are creating new possibilities for how and where products are made. Automation and robotics are reducing the labor cost advantage that drove manufacturing to low-wage countries in the first place. When machines do most of the work, being close to consumers becomes more important than finding the cheapest workers. Additive manufacturing, better known as 3D printing, is enabling more distributed production models. Rather than massive factories shipping products globally, we may see networks of smaller facilities producing goods closer to where they're needed. Artificial intelligence and predictive analytics are making supply chains smarter and more resilient. These technologies can anticipate disruptions, automatically reroute components, and optimize production across multiple facilities. As these trends accelerate, certain countries are particularly well positioned. Mexico, with its proximity to the US market and improving infrastructure, Vietnam, which has successfully attracted electronics manufacturing from China, Poland emerging as a manufacturing hub for the European market, and India, leveraging its large domestic market and improving business environment. Conversely, some industries face particularly difficult transitions. Fast fashion, built on extremely cost-sensitive global supply chains, consumer electronics with razor-thin margins, basic commodity manufacturing with limited differentiation, and industries requiring specialized ecosystem development. For consumers, these changes will bring both challenges and opportunities. Higher prices for many goods as reshoring increases costs, more customization as production moves closer to markets, potentially better quality as manufacturers compete on factors beyond price, and greater transparency about where and how products are made. the reshaping of global manufacturing is still in its early stages. The ultimate balance between nationalism and globalization remains to be determined. But one thing is clear: the era of ever-expanding global supply chains has given way to a more complex, regionalized, and security-conscious approach to making the products we use every day. We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring how supply chain nationalism is fundamentally reshaping global manufacturing. Let's recap what we've learned. Global supply chains built over decades are being rapidly reconfigured in response to tariffs, security concerns, and pandemic lessons. Key industries like automotive, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals are at the forefront of this transformation. Companies are pursuing diverse strategies, from reshoring to nearshoring to friendshoring, based on their specific needs. Countries worldwide are responding with their own measures, creating a more regionalized global economy. Technology is enabling new manufacturing models that may further disrupt traditional patterns. What we're witnessing isn't simply a temporary reaction to specific policies. It represents a fundamental rethinking of how we balance efficiency, security, and resilience in our manufacturing systems. Supply chain nationalism brings both benefits and costs. Greater security and reduced vulnerability come at the price of higher consumer costs and potential economic inefficiency. The ultimate question is whether these trade-offs are worth it, and that's a question each society must answer for itself. For you as a consumer, these changes will be increasingly visible in the products you buy and the prices you pay. That Made in China label you've grown accustomed to seeing may gradually be replaced by Made in Mexico, Made in Vietnam, or even Made in USA. I encourage you to become more conscious of where your products come from and how global supply chains affect your daily life. The next time you purchase something, whether it's a smartphone, a car, or even medication, take a moment to consider its journey to you. Where was it made? How many countries contributed to its creation? And how might that change in the coming years? If you found this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing to Trend Pulse and hitting the notification bell. We release new in-depth analysis videos every Sunday at 7 p.m. CST, helping you understand the forces shaping our world. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How have you noticed supply chain shifts affecting products you buy? Are you willing to pay more for goods made closer to home? Your perspectives add valuable dimensions to this conversation. This is Trend Pulse, helping you stay ahead of the trends that matter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Sunday.